It has been long said that to understand the future, one must know the past. I have accepted this as a fact of life and made a sincere endeavor to correlate past occurrences in the field of ufology with my predictions of the future. At the time when I became a serious researcher in the very strange field of study, there were certain subjects that were popular with the very large active research groups such as CUFOs, the Center for UFO Studies, NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, and MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. While there were broad areas of acceptance of some of the basic interests on the subject, others were purposely neglected. Most interest was centered on eyewitness testimonies and available photos taken with the old film cameras. Honor was also given to accepted pieces of physical evidence such as landing traces and other unexpected disturbances of the intimate environment where an unknown flying object was seen. If individuals reported that the engine of their automobile died, then that became an investigative fact. Early investigative organizations were often under severe scrutiny of propaganda mills that were able to twist the facts to suit their own uses. Some resolved only to investigate the possibility that vehicles of unknown origin were invading our skies, but gave little attention to the fact that they were seemingly intelligently controlled. The research took a giant leap forward when attention was focused on the possibility of intelligent control. The next logical step was who was controlling them. Such serious discussions led to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Occasionally, individuals claimed to have had direct contact with the pilots of these vehicles. Frank Sitzer and George Van Tassel were two such persons. Their experiences inspired them to create an airport for these space vehicles in Giant Rock, California. Their interest gave much weight to publicity in the 1950s, and some today say their experiences were credible. Next came an era where not only unidentified vehicles were deemed to be okay to study, but also their pilots, with some accepting the possibility that these unknown beings could have come from another planet in our solar system. After all, canals have been spotted on Mars for many years, with some of the most popular pseudo-scientific belief that intelligent life did indeed dwell on this planet. Almost immediately upon the heel of this emerging acceptance came the amazing kidnapping of two people in 1961. Yes, the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. It occurred in New Hampshire in September of that year. The Hill case underwent as much investigation as any well-known murder case on record, yet the verdict remained in limbo for many years. There are those researchers who cast their doubts even today despite the research gained from the Hill's experience, which has resulted in major contributions to the depths of our understanding. Betty Hill's recollection of a different sort of star map which she had been shown while on board the alien craft was one such benefit. With her account and the work of amateur astronomer Marjorie Fish, we learn and have come to accept a twin star system known as Zeta Reticuli. I believe the Hill abduction case opened the door for acceptance for further alien abduction cases such as the 1973 Patagonia, Mississippi incident involving Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, who were both taken by alien beings aboard a craft against their will. This was followed by the November 5th, 1975 case of the lumberer Travis Walton, who was taken from a forested area in Arizona. Travis's case was different in that at the time of his abduction, he had no conscious memory of being abducted, but stated that he was standing in close proximity to a craft as it was powering up. At an instant, a bolt of energy shot out of the vehicle, hitting him squarely in the chest and knocking him some distance from where he had been standing. According to the police department and his close colleagues who were present at the time of the incident and reported him missing, Travis was missing for 5 days and then returned. The movie Fire in the Sky chronicles his ordeal, and Travis is still experiencing at various events and telling his story today. While Travis's case was widely known, the case that gained even more publicity was the 1985 case of Whitley Strieber. Whitley, a prolific author of many books, includes his most famous and profound work, Communion. It was not just the intriguing material in the book that made such an impact, but also the cover, which depicted a typical gray alien, which has since become the most widely reported species seen today. Communion is one of the most important and historical chronicles of the subject. Strieber has written many books on the subject of alien abduction and has also appeared on numerous radio and television shows around the world. Even today, he still has experiences and appears on various programs. Communion was made into a major motion picture, which has helped us gain insight into the Greys and their purpose of the visitations. Fast forward to the late 1980s and early 1990s, this was the era when I became involved in the alien implant research. MUFON had just begun to accept the alien abduction phenomenon as a reality. The late Dr. John Mack, a tenured professor at Harvard University, came out with his book, Abduction, in 1994. This text, in my opinion, led to the acceptance of alien abduction as a genuine facet of the UFO experience. My historical contribution, as it turned out to be, was based on an attempt to expose a possible fraud, followed by the idea of what if, and then taking a giant leap of faith before it all fell together. Did a certain number of abduction victims have objects implanted into their bodies by alien beings? Was this a local phenomenon, or was it a regional or worldwide thing? My instinctive nature led me to believe the abduction phenomenon was a reality, but I could not wrap my head around the idea that some individuals actually had these real-life 3D dimensional objects in their bodies. In actuality, it was my disbelief that propelled me forward to begin these investigations. In 1995, I was writing articles for the official periodical of the Ventura Santa Barbara MUFON group, The Vortex. Some of my investigative reporting included covering presentations at some of the local conferences on the UFO subject. I did as I was instructed, reporting my own flavored version and thoughts as to what I was hearing and seeing. Some of the presenters may have been displeased with my opinions, but nevertheless, they were my own, and I was not dissuaded by negative comments on the matter. During one of these events, I was approached by someone with a set of X-rays of the feet. He claimed that the two apparent objects residing in the left great toe were alien implants. It was all I could do from containing myself from laughing out loud. I muttered, "Oh wow," and walked away thinking I had just come across another nutcase. Within a few short minutes, the state section director of our MUFON group approached me and asked me if I'd seen the X-rays of the alien implants. I gazed at her in amazement, thinking she was much more naive than I thought. I politely told her that I had viewed the X-rays and thought they were very good X-rays of the feet. She inquired, "But what about the implants? Didn't you see the implants in the big toe of the left foot?" I explained to her that, in my opinion, as a practicing foot doctor, they appeared to be two metallic objects that probably leftovers from a previous foot surgery. I also explained that many times we use wires, pins, screws, and other metallic devices and hardware to stabilize bones when we operate. With that, she begged me to go back and take another look at the X-rays and talk to the individual who showed them to us. In an act of kindness and with respect for my friend, I relented and accompanied her back to the table where the gentleman appeared to be sitting with his X-rays in hand. The initial conversation was brief and to the point. I inquired as to what the patient had undergone, whether they had undergone a previous surgery. He denied and said that the woman to whom the X-ray belonged had never had an operation. I asked if he had a copy of her medical records, and with one swift move, His hand dove into a large suitcase-like bag and pulled out a large folder containing a voluptuous amount of papers. "Here they are, if you'd like to have a look at them," he challenged. I asked if he'd trust me to take them to my room and go through them, and he agreed, and I placed them in a plastic bag I had acquired at the conference. That night, I went through the records and noted that there was no entries indicating a previous foot surgery. I returned the medical records to the gentleman the following morning, suggesting that if he felt that the objects on the x-rays were unusual, then he should have them removed and analyzed. He revealed that his client had no medical insurance and couldn't afford to pay for the surgery or the analysis. At that moment, I contemplated my next move. This might be an opportunity to prove the subject of alien implants was all a bunch of nonsense and have some fun at it at the same time. I asked the gentleman where is this implantee lived, or where they live, and learned that she hailed from the great state of Texas. My offer was simple and genuine. Tell you what, you get her to California and I'll do the surgery free of charge. Though he was surprised to learn that my offer was serious, we exchanged contact information, and after advising the section director of what had taken place, I left the conference. Within a week of arriving home, I received a phone call from the implant researcher asking if I was able to do another case as well. Shocked, I was kind of caught off guard, to say the least. I asked him where the object in question was located and learned that it was in the back of the fellow's left hand. Without giving much thought, I agreed. I do not perform surgery on hand, so I had to enlist the services of a friend who is a general surgeon. He also was intrigued and thought it would be fun to share in the laughter with me when we extracted one of these terrestrial foreign bodies that we had removed so many times over the years. In August 1995, these first two surgeries were performed. At the time, I had no way of knowing the event that took place would change my life forever, or that the hand of fate would turn the tables on who was going to get the last laugh, for it certainly wasn't my colleague or myself. A large gray T-shaped object was extracted from one side of the great toes of the female patient, and then a large object about the size of a small cantaloupe seed with a dark gray coating was extracted from the opposite side of the same toe. The male patient yielded a tiny seed-like object from the back of his left hand, exactly matching the one removed from the toe of the female. Both surgeries also brought some very high strangeness. Neither of the surgical patients had any visible scar where the object would have penetrated the body. In addition, there was absolutely no disruption of the subcutaneous, something like that, tissues, especially where the largest T-shaped object resided. This implant measured approximately 1/2 centimeter in each direction. This was large in comparison to the size of the toe in which it was placed. It should be noted that the first surgery was done under local anesthesia as well as a hypnotic state for relaxation purposes, performed by a professional hypnotist at the patient's request. During the surgery, at the point the foreign object was touched, the patient, in severe discomfort, rebelled and acted as if there was no anesthesia administered at all. Both the hypnotic state and the local anesthesia had to be performed again. Those events, coupled with the fact that all three objects were coated with a biological substance that could not be cut through with the surgical scalpel, made the case not only unlaughable, but very serious. When the procedures were finished, I pondered about what my next step should be, and finally decided I would treat these cases as any other routine surgical extraction of a foreign body. I sent the surrounding soft tissues for pathological analysis and had no expectations of getting a report back with anything unusual. This was another error in my thinking. The reports indicated there was no visible sign of any inflammatory or rejection reaction by the surrounding tissues to the metallic foreign body. This was not possible. I thought, I must have not kept up with some of the latest findings in pathology over the last 30 years of my practice. Immediately, I went on the internet and gained access to some of the world's most prestigious medical libraries, such as Stanford and Harvard medical faculties. I learned the searches I had asked for were not free of charge, but actually quite costly. I had taken this quest so far, so I decided to spend money and see it through. Sifting through reams of the latest pathological materials of rejection reactions with metallic foreign bodies, I found new hormone responses and tissue activating triggers, but lo and behold, there were no actual new findings from what I had learned in the past. This intensified the mystery. It was my decision to have another pathology laboratory look at the specimens. This was done, and the results garnered from the second lab test agreed with the first. This was another factor, was a little bit of a mystery. All the tissues surrounding all three specimens showed an intense amount of nerve tissue. I decided to home in on this finding and found that the nerves were actually were a category of proprioceptors. These are usually found in the fingertips and the balls of the feet and are for the purpose of sensing pressure, fine touch, temperature, etc. What in the world would they be doing in soft tissue surrounding foreign objects removed from the side of a toe and the back of a hand? I found myself being sucked deeper and deeper into the depths of a mysterious force for which there was seemingly no return. I had to know more. There had been no attempts so far to look at the metallic portion of the specimens. I knew absolutely nothing about the study of metallurgy. All I could rely on was some very basic recollection of what I had taken in my college chemistry and physics classes, and that wasn't much. The next step was to seek advice of the professionals, so I secluded myself in my office and spent hours on the phone trying to contact a person who could do some analysis. As it turned out, there were a few good-hearted souls who offered their services, but warned me that they could not give me written reports because I would have to bear the costs of coming through the front door, so to speak. These costs were far more than I had budgeted for a joke. I decided to give the backdoor research a try and sent one specimen off to one of my friends at a local lab. I waited for weeks and never received a response. My phone call to the individual caused another source of distress, as he told me he could only do so much in a day and I'd have to be at the bottom of the list. I was counseled just to be patient and wait for his results. I thanked him and I resolved myself for a long wait. I wasn't disappointed. After nearly a month and a half, I received a phone call from my friend who, in the middle of his analysis, wanted to know if I was playing a joke on him. I assured him that I was not playing a joke and asked him what his findings were. He told me he likened some of the metallic properties to iron meteorites. I was flabbergasted, to say the least. I thanked him for his endeavors and tried to convince him to write me a report on his letterhead. He refused and told me he could not do this because the company he's working for wouldn't allow him to have his own letterhead used for for findings produced on the company premises. With that, our discussion was concluded, and so is the matter of further metallurgical research. As much as I tried to keep the word from getting out about the surgeries I had performed, the more questions were asked from outside sources, and particularly from the local MUFON group. I endeavored to keep my name a secret for a variety of reasons, especially because I didn't want my professional reputation in the medical community to be questioned. Despite all my efforts, I was contacted by a lady who claimed to have had an alien abduction experience and told me that she thought she might have an implant on the back of her neck and shoulder area. I questioned her in depth on the phone and agreed to a face-to-face meeting in my office. I listened to her stories pertaining to her strange dreamlike sequences of her interactions with non-human beings, gray in color, less than 4 feet tall, with large heads and very large eyes, upturned eyes. She was certain that these were not just dreams, as one morning she awoke with small spots of blood on her bed sheets and a very sore spot on her left shoulder. Looking in the mirror, she was able to see a small raised dime-sized lesion in the region that was painful to the touch. She had not had any irritation in that area prior to her dream that night. She rationalized that it must have been bitten by some kind of insect in the night. But over the next 2-week period, she noticed the lesion had shrunk to the size of a pinhead, yet was still very painful to the touch. During our visit, I took detailed notes and told her to contact me in about a week. I also advised her that she should have an x-ray taken if there was a possible foreign body below the area of the skin lesion. Before she left the office, I supplied her with a thorough questionnaire that I had compiled from other alien abduction researchers and asked that she answer and return it in the mail, and they would help me to evaluate the case. She did as she was instructed, and I received the package in about a week. She scored in the high probability profile range for positive alien abduction. During the next week, the patient had an x-ray taken in the area and brought the x-rays for my evaluation. I was surprised to see there was a round shadow below the site of the skin lesion, indicating a non-metallic foreign body. At that point, I called a colleague who was a dermatologist and a pathologist. I arranged for him to see the patient, and after the consultation, he called me and explained that his diagnosis was a lesion called a calcifying epithelioma, based on his past experience. At that point, I did not inform him that the x-ray demonstrated a round radio opaque shadow deep to the skin lesion, but rather asked if he would consider surgically removing the lesion. He agreed and volunteered to perform the pathological analysis. I concurred, with the exception that if there were any any hard foreign material removed, that it would be turned over to me for further analysis. With those details out of the way, the surgery was performed in a short time afterwards. As it turned out, a small grayish-white ball was removed along with the skin lesion. My colleague thought it was probably just a calcium deposit. I asked him how he arrived at the opinion without analysis being performed, and he told me that there was nothing else it could be. I had not decided what to do with the specimen yet, but knew that I must secure a metallurgical analysis before making any further statements about the event. I was prompted to do some in-depth research into the subject of calcifying epitheliomas, and was amazed to find that the course of events leading to the formation of these lesions was exactly opposite to what the patient had described. Later, after metallurgical analysis was performed, we determined that there was no calcium in the object whatsoever. I did not openly speak about this case to many people outside the immediate circle of friends or colleagues at MUFON. Most individuals I did confide in wanted me to push the research to a higher level with more cases and more biological research. Of course, all of this sounded very good, but was just too costly for my pocketbook, and without outside finances, I couldn't support the type of research that was needed. During these discussions, contacts from outside sources began to increase. My activities were quite well known and an interest to the procurers of news stories in the public. I made a serious effort to keep my name out of the news, calling myself Dr. X and many other false monikers. Some of the publicity got out to the radio networks, and I began to get calls from all over the globe from radio stations wanting to know if I was the one who had removed alien implants from human beings. Throughout this time, I continued to be contacted by individuals who alleged that they'd been involved in alien abduction phenomenon. One lady called me from New York State and told me she had read about a case that Bob Hopkins had been working on, which an abduction victim was floated out the window in her apartment building into a waiting flying saucer with two non-human beings, one on each side of the abductee. They were described as the typical gray beings with black eyes. She then revealed that, too, she had been abducted from a campsite in Upper New York State by these same looking beings. She described them being on the ship, which had numerous rounded corridors with rooms on either side. When she peered into these rooms, she could see other human beings naked and lying on tables while aliens performed procedures on them. She told them that she had no fear because she felt as she was been given permission. She herself had given them permission at the time when her soul was not yet born into her human form. She went on to say that they took her into a room and commanded her telepathically to remove her clothing and sit on the table that had one pedestal in the middle for support. She did as she was told and was informed that the procedures they were going to perform would not hurt her, and as soon as she was done, she was returned home. She would be returned home. Whenever she would feel fear or pain, one taller-looking gray would come close to her, put one of his big eyeballs next to hers, and suddenly all the bad feelings would be gone and there would be no more discomfort or pain. The procedures she described were medical in nature. They did a vaginal examination with a long tube connected to an apparatus on the ceiling. The device had an end, which could be changed, and the new end piece had a light on it. She went on to explain that the device was being placed over her belly button and slowly pushed in. She felt no pain and there was no bleeding. She added that they seemed to be looking at a television-type screen while moving the object around in her abdomen. She felt suction and a slight tugging and then watched as a small amount of fluid flowed into the attachment container. When that procedure was finished, they examined her eyes and her tongue. She tried to ask the beings questions telepathically, but none of them did answer her except to tell her that no harm would come to her and that she has been there on previous occasions throughout her life. She asked questions pertaining to the ship's lightings and structure, but her answers were vague. She responded that the lighting seemed to come from nowhere and was bright, yet subdued, and the walls were shiny as metal, yet had organic appearance. The temperature of the craft was cold, but not uncomfortable. She describes her breathing as labored, and the air stale and oppressive. Her captors were somewhat mechanical, lacking in emotion, seemingly operating as a robotic unit. Occasionally she would hear a cry or a scream coming from one of the other rooms. Still, whatever method they had used to calm her down took over her senses, and while there she felt no sympathy for the other humans. Once they had finished with her examination, she was asked to get dressed and then was escorted out of the procedure room and into another area where other humans were sitting on bench-like protrusions from the wall. All sat in silence, waiting their turn to be taken, 3 or 4 at a time, through another doorway and into a room which she could not see from where she was sitting. She waited her turn and was taken by 2 grays through the passageway and into a large room which looked like a huge aircraft hangar. From that point, her memory completely disappeared until she woke up in her bed at home. Upon arising, she felt sick with muscle aches and pains as if she had a case of the flu. Her primary need was for fluids, and she ran into the bathroom and began gulping down numerous glasses of water. She also stated that there were some red bumps and a tiny area of bleeding at her belly button site. The days following this event were filled with periods of depression, abdominal cramping, and irregular menstrual periods that lasted for several months. Since she was not married and had few close friends, she had no one to whom she could relate to with what happened to her. This added to her depression and bad moods. Fearing she might lose her job if she lost control or shared her story, she did not bring these moods to her employment. I was the first to whom she had confided because she thought that I could be of help to her. She thought she might have had an implant placed in her abdomen. The only way to determine if that were true would be to take an x-ray or perform a CAT scan of her abdomen. She was willing to have this done, so I proceeded to order the x-rays. They were taken the following week, but the report from the radiologist was negative for any foreign body. She seemed relieved with the result. Still, I mentioned the possibility of trying regressive hypnosis to learn more about the particular event that she had relayed to me, or the events that may have taken place earlier in her life. Our abductee followed through with my suggestion, and the case became one that typically presents the alien abduction phenomenon. Another most interesting and typical case was that of a 12-year-old girl whose family was having abduction experiences on a regular basis. The parents were stressed to the limit and feared for the safety of their daughter. I informed them that my field of study was of that of the material objects found in the bodies of abduction victims, but they had specifically sought me out because of my scientific approach to the entire subject matter rather than to find implants. I decided to at least listen to their stories out of the academic interest on my part and the compelling need of theirs. I was told that the phenomenon had been ongoing for many years and that the parents on both sides of the family were also involved. Their episode began about 3 months prior to the birth of their daughter. The mother was taken aboard a UFO craft and some kind of procedure was performed on her abdominal area. She was in pain for several days and she was examined by her medical doctor. He couldn't find anything wrong. Otherwise, the pregnancy was normal. Their description of the abduction scenarios was typical and also involved the gray aliens. Both the mother and the father told me the grays were not acting alone. The parents had also seen beings that looked exactly like us, blonde hair and blue eyes. The mother described the male entity as absolutely handsome, to the point that it was difficult to believe that those like him were not human. They communicated with her telepathically, informing her that she and her family were not in danger and they were part of a worldwide experiment to alter the genetics of human beings. According to the handsome alien, the daughter was going to be one of the new humans. I had not heard of this from anyone previously, and I thought it might offer some reason for the entire abduction phenomenon. In my discussions with her father, he told me that in his experiences he was connected to an apparatus that applied suction to his penis, and then he was given visually stimulating images of various types of human females in sexual activity. He was unable to control himself and felt as though he had ejaculated. No explanation was given from him for the procedure, yet the gray beings assured him that they weren't going to hurt him. In addition, he was also told that he was participating in the experiment for the greater good of humankind. The parents, rather than react negatively, accepted what they were told. Their attitude toward their abductors was not hostile, and they had learned to live with the phenomenon until their daughter was taken. They were greatly concerned when their daughter was aboard the ship because they were not in the procedure room with her and were unable to see what was happening to her, and when she returned, she had little memory of the events. The daughter differed from typical children in many ways. Her mental capacity was much greater than her school friends, to the extent that she often became embarrassed by her innate understandings of the world. She could calculate mathematical problems in her head at a very rapid rate, and she had a great affinity for animals, which, by the way, had no fear of her whatsoever. The parents spoke of a time when the daughter picked up a tiny, injured baby bird that had fallen out of its nest and was barely breathing. Within minutes, the bird was re-energized and perky. The girl returned the baby to the nest without any objection from the mother bird. I decided to interview the girl separately from her parents and obtain their permission to do so. Gracie was 12 years old with blonde hair and deep blue eyes and had a gentle disposition. She was slight of build and of normal average height for her age. I explained to her that I was a researcher in the field of abduction phenomenon and would appreciate it very much if she would talk about her experiences with me. She agreed to do her best to answer my questions. In general, she described the following. Sometime during the night, she would be awoken from a sound sleep in her room, and she would see a bright light coming through the window. During this time, she felt an inner peace, but was wide awake and had no desire to sleep. Next, a ball of silver light would come floating out of her bed, remain suspended there for a time, and would smile at her. The smiling orb, would take her on numerous adventures where she could see the stars in the sky as she flew over the houses below. She could see the earth from afar, describing it as a beautiful big round bluish white ball just suspended in the blackness of the heavens. This girl was taken to a place where there were many good friends who would play games with her, games that were a lot different than the ones she would play here. She tried to teach these space games to space friends how to play cards, but they could not understand why she thought it was fun. Instead, she was taught different sorts of games. One involved a silver-like spoon object. The object was to hold the spoon midair and toss it back and forth like a ball, but only using her mind. No hands allowed. Her new friends found the pastime was great fun. However, when Gracie asked for a baseball and tried to gently toss it to one of the boys, he ducked, letting the ball pass him right by without any attempt to catch it. Another task was to create a pyramid in mid-air using their minds to add blocks onto the object until it got so heavy that it fell to the floor. When the blocks fell, they all laughed. I asked if there were any regular children there. She responded by asking, "Oh, do you mean from Earth?" I was a bit shocked, as I had not anticipated this direct response. She told me that there were other Earth children there, but she couldn't tell which ones because they had all different appearances. She quickly added that here on Earth there are a lot of children that do not look the same either, having differences such as hair color, head shape, slant of eyes, and so on. I acknowledged that fact and continued with our session. I asked if there's an older person present who is responsible for the games the children are playing. She explained that at each session there were different people in charge, and they were different appearances as well. One of them, whom she described as meaning character, looked like a very large lizard with strange colored pupils going across the eye. She thought it was very gruff, having little patience with kids, but he caused them no harm. She also told me that he had a very bad case of body odor, but she was afraid to mention that to the other kids. Each of the sessions appeared to be some sort of lesson for both Earth children as well as for the others. She did not know where the other children came from, since open conversation was not permitted among them. I was very interested in what she had told me previously, referencing how her abduction scenarios began seeing a bright white light and gleaming bright silver ball hovering above her in her room. "Could you draw what you saw?" I inquired. Though she said she was not good at drawing, she'd be happy to try. Her parents supplied a large pad of paper and some sharp pencils. I asked Gracie to begin drawing with what she at first saw coming into her room. I let her know that I would be asking questions from time to time as she drew to help me understand the image she was making. She began drawing slowly, showing that she was in bed with the window in the far wall of her room. She drew pencil streaks coming from the window and told me that these were the beginning of the light ball. Then she drew a basketball-sized object with pencil strokes emanating from all sides. I asked her if that was the silver ball that she was telling me about previously, and she nodded yes. At that point she stopped drawing. I asked her what was going on now. Her response was that she could not remember what happened directly after the ball was over her, so I switched gears, asking her if she could sketch what she was holding, what was holding up the ball. She began to extend lines below the ball coming from each side. She told me that these were the little legs it was standing on. I asked her if she could complete the drawings of the legs, and she did exactly that by extending the lines downwards and filling in the central section of each leg with some anatomical details, including a knee joint and finally ankles and feet. I asked her if the ball also had arms. She immediately began penciling two skinny little arms extending from each of the ball. After a couple more questions about the details of the arms, she had added pretty much more anatomical detail, including two hands with thin, elongated fingers. There were only 4 fingers, and I asked her if she had made a mistake. She did not respond well to my question and seemed to think that I doubted the exactness of her memories. I calmed her fears by telling her she was a wonderful artist and really appreciated the time she was giving me to draw this. Next, she drew the final part of the drawing. I asked if the ball had a head and a neck, and she began to draw from the top of the ball a very thin neck, and on top of this neck was a very large head. I did not ask her any further questions, but instead let her continue the drawing without comment. Soon she began to fill in the features of the face. I stood in amazement as she shaped a very tiny vestigial-type nose, a rudimentary mouth, no ears, and large black, haunting, upturned eyes. I found myself staring into the face of one of the most famous gray beings. I thanked Gracie for her wonderful drawing, and I asked her if it would be okay to share it with her parents. She was excited to show them the photo and ran through the open door of the room, calling for them to see. Come see what she's drawn." I had no magical answer for the parents. The only thing I could offer this family was my past experience with other abductees from whom I had interviewed, as well as the knowledge I had gleaned from the books of the great pioneers in the subject, such as Bob Hopkins, David Jacobs, John Mack, and Yvonne Smith. I assured them that most cases of this type did not seem to bring irreparable harm to the abductees as long as they functioned normally in their daily lives. I also advised them if they wanted to seek further detail of those events that had transpired in their lives, that they should seek a qualified hypnotherapist for a regression, and if not, to just leave things as they were. I also reassured them that they were not alone, but they were part of some worldwide plan being carried out by an advanced civilization for unknown purposes. By this time it was clear these contacts and experiences had convinced me without question that we have hidden visitors, and so began my journey into the unknown.